most of the interviews that have existed over the past few years, decades really, have been secretive. So nobody got permission to talk to him.
How did you get to talk to him?
So the hard part, let's just start with the easy part. The easy part was getting Carlos to say yes. And it was a matter of like, I contacted his lawyer, explained who I am, talked about my books, and I said, I'd love to meet your guy. And Carlos has a lawyer. Carlos's lawyer passed along the message. Carlos writes back, said, sure, Washington Post guy, I'll meet with you. He's not publicity shy. He's the opposite. He likes attention. He loves the idea of getting an interview. But the problem, as I mentioned, was the French did not want to let me talk to him. They don't want to let anybody talk to him except under very restrictive conditions. So I had to agree. There's no recording equipment. There's no camera taken into prison. I only had a pencil and a notebook.
Pencil and a notebook.
That's
old school.
Oh, really old school.
You were
writing things down as fast as I could.
Like transcribing?
And then after it's over, going back to my hotel, just trying to doing a Julian Dorey and trying to photographically remember everything that happened and every nuance and every wrinkle in his brow, tried to kind of recreate every bit of that. But even with that, I mean, one of the restrictions I had to agree to was this was not going to result in a Q&A interview because the French did not want me to have this verbatim, conversation with Carlos that would allow Carlos to reinterpret history. So it had to be, I was able to use little snippets, but I couldn't quote him extensively. But
how does that even work? That seems really subjective to,
Yeah, and it's frustrating for sure. But on the other hand, my whole purpose in meeting him was I had some things I wanted to ask. But even with those things, I didn't think I would trust anything Carlos said. He's going to exaggerate. He's not going to tell me the truth. So it was more to kind of get him to kind of fill in, color a little bit of the blank spaces that I had in my own narrative of what happened, but also just to kind of get a measure of the man. And that was very important mentally and getting my head around the project and writing about him and his life is to see him as a 75-year-old man. And then you'll see in the book, I mentioned kind of briefly this encounter that I had with him in the prologue. And then at the end of the book, it's the bad days are over. He's been in prison for a long time. And here I am face to face with the man for the first time. And so people have read this part of the book, say it's kind of a very profound moment where after you've read the story of his life, you're sitting there looking at the guy eyeball to eyeball.
Oh, I like how you did that.
Yeah. So it was a great way to end up, after telling a story, to kind of like, what did it amount to? What was it? How did it matter? And you get a sense of that when you sit down and look at the guy face to face.
Well, I'm really curious about this process, though, to even get there with the French. So it's easy on his end. He's like, fuck it, I'll do it. But had he really talked to anyone except that one French journalist?
This one French journalist most of the interviews that have existed over the past few years, decades really, have been secretive. So nobody got permission to talk to him, but managed to find ways to do it. The one case was a French journalist who basically kind of came at him as just, well, I'm a member of the public that wants to meet, I've got my own personal reasons for wanting to meet him. And because she was a, attractive woman, Carlos is a obsessive womanizer. So you just, put a pretty face in front of him. He's very happy to talk to you. And she managed to kind of have many, many visits with him. This was like back in the 2010s.
That went past French intel?
Yeah. So she just showed up like she was like just like a fan or a member of his, support group or something. But she didn't do it as a journalist, but she ended up writing a book based in French based on her experiences with him.
What was her name?
Her name was Sophie Bonnet.
Sophie Bonnet.
Bonnet.
Let's get a look at Sophie.
Yeah. So she's a documentary filmmaker / book writer. She's I've talked to her. She's a very interesting lady. She's older now, but she did it earlier in her career.
Okay, there's her IMDb.
Then later on, in fact, I benefited from this one interview that happened. There's an Israeli journalist who really wanted to talk to Carlos, and he wasn't allowed to. So he managed to talk one of Carlos's attorneys. He had a couple. This one he married, actually. He married his attorney. They had a kind of a prison ceremony, and
Carlos married his attorney?
his attorney. Yes,
Is he still married to her now?
She died about a year ago, but they were married for a long time. But he was able to. This journalist was able to talk the attorney into basically bringing. She had a cell phone she was allowed to bring into the prison meetings with Carlos. She'd bring her phone in. She'd ring this journalist up and basically relay questions like, Carlos, what do you think of this or that? And he would reply into the phone, and the phone call was being recorded on the other end. So this Israeli journalist very kind of trickily got a pretty long interview out of him.
They're not like that at all.
No. So I wanted to go through the front door, but this Israeli journalist, ended up doing a documentary film based on his.
What's the guy's name?
Is Yaron, Yaron Niski, Niski. And his documentary, actually, it was released on Fox Nation earlier this summer. It was Carlos in his own words, but it wasn't Carlos, face to face. It was essentially a kind of a bootleg interview with a guy.
Right.
But I ended up making friends with the journalist. We found out about each other's work, and so we collaborated. I was on his documentary. I was featured in it a number of times, and he shared all his transcripts, so all the conversations.
That's cool.
So I had things that I could relate because of my conversation with Carlos, but also had the benefit of many hours, I guess maybe more than 10 hours of telephone conversations that he had. And what that all amounts to is you see a lot of things through Carlos's lens, and you realize that about half or more is just crap. But there are parts that, he actually told the truth about this. So it's kind of a fact check.
You could verify.
You could say certain things or certain things that he wouldn't have a reason to lie about because they're not flattering for him. And I ended up, because of those interviews, including Sophie's, I had a pretty remarkable book, and my own encounter and my own research and talking to CIA people and others who were involved in capturing him, I had a ton of material. And then it was just a matter of what makes the best story. What of those, this is the thing about narrative nonfiction, is you end up with a lot of stuff, but then almost like a filmmaker, what is the most interesting story I can tell based on the facts that I know?
Right.
And then you construct the story out of, it's all real facts, but then you have to kind of be the painter with a paintbrush and
That's right.
paint the picture.
This process to get to talk to him, though, where they came up with all of these stipulations, who are you talking to do that? Like, are you talking with French intelligence? Or?
Started actually with the prison ministry. So there's you write to the people who run this one prison.
What's the prison?
It's called the Poissy. It's the Maison Centrale de Poissy, but it's a little town outside Paris, about 20 miles to the west of Paris. And other fascinating thing about the prison, it had this past as a convent, but when the Nazis took over the country, it became like a Gestapo headquarters. And so they killed and tortured members of the French freedom movement there. So it had this really crazy history, but that's
living with the ghosts when you're in there. Yeah.
So I wrote to them, and they said, well, you need to send us all this information and all these forms you need to complete. And I did that, and I waited and waited.
What year did you write to them?
First year was 2024, early 2024, when I first reached out. And then there'd be like radio silence for months, and I would send reminders, are you going to let me see him or not? And they would just be no reply. So I started kind of working through other angles, trying the French embassy in Washington. Can they help me? And they were somewhat sympathetic. My second book, Black Flags, came out in French and had actually was well received in France. I did a lot of interviews, so I'm somewhat known there. And they were helpful. But then it was like, then there's just layers and layers of bureaucracy. There's the French Justice Ministry, which ultimately had to sign off. It just took pressure on so many pressure points until finally I got a yes. And once I got the yes, I went right away to France because I was so afraid they're going to change their mind. And even to the moment I walked into that prison to have the interview, I was so afraid that somebody was going to back out. Carlos is going to be sick, or he's going to change his mind. The French are going to decide they don't want me to talk to him after all. So part of the suspense was, am I actually going to get to have this moment?
You're in the story. That's what's cool. It's like you've written all these stories where you're reporting on it after the fact and going and visiting the places and living with the ghosts and trying to understand what happened there, which is what you do here. But then the culmination of it is you get to go directly to the source, and it's like you are now the first person walking into your own book.
Yeah, and it's the first time I've done that because I've always had this distance in my other books. I'm kind of writing and from a dispassionate, third-person voice. This is the first time I said in a book, I was there. I saw him. I was sitting there and Carlos walks in. And so describing that moment was becomes personal because I'm part of the story.
Was it just one day with him in there?
Yeah. I was
how
hoping,
many hours did you have?
I got like an hour and a half. That's all they would give me. So it was very compressed. And it was frustrating because Carlos, even though he looks robust, you can see he's starting to fade.
Yeah, he's 76, right?
Yeah, he's good 76 now. And he would lose a thread in the conversation. He would repeat himself. And the other problem, I mentioned he has an obsessive interest in women. There was a woman in the room, and she happened to be a French justice ministry official. They were kind of as a minder to make sure I didn't do anything, break any of my promises. She was 27, as I recall. He could not take his eyes off of her. And I would be talking to him. I'd ask him a question. He would ignore me. He's kind of facing the woman and saying things like, "Are you a real blonde?"
Still got that dog in him.
Just incorrigible. But, the French biographer, the woman I mentioned, Sophie Bonnet, said in her book, she described it as almost that he is constantly on the hunt, that any female within his sight, in his range of vision, was a potential target. And no matter how old, how young, just whatever the circumstances, he's just obsessed, and he has to figure out, does he have a chance with her? Is it somebody that's going to like him? And you can see him, even as an old man, working it and trying to kind of impress this young woman, and very, very annoyed by the fact that I was also in the room and just creating an obstacle to him potentially getting to meet this woman. So it was wild to see him kind of operate that way.
That's crazy. You only got an hour and a half. I mean, that's an hour and a half more than pretty much anyone has ever gotten. But
my publisher or editor who worked with me through the publisher, when we were talking about this and about the possibility of the interview, he kept saying, if you can get Carlos to grunt at you, then that's a victory. It just is important to have some personal connection with him. And I got a lot more than that. It was not what I had hoped to get. I hoped to be able to maybe meet him several times over many hours and record a conversation. So it was much less than that, but it was gratifying to succeed in at least making the meeting happen.
Thank you guys for watching the episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. They're both a huge, huge help. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below.